Excellencies, dear Chairman, Ambassador Professor Ischinger, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bavarian representation in Berlin for today's MSC Kick-off with the presentation of the Munich Security Report. For the first time, we have an elephant in the room, which I hereby expressly welcome. In my eyes, there is no better way to illustrate the intention of the Munich Security Conference and its security report. The aim is to name the elephant in the room and thus also more difficult topics and to deal with them together. There is more than enough need for discussion and topics. The elephant here in the room only addresses some of them. The international situation has changed drastically in recent years and has worsened further in recent months. Russia is acting more and more aggressively, not only in Ukraine. NATO countries are also massively covered with hybrid attacks. The situation in the Middle East is unstable, and we are concerned about the new informal alliance of CRINC. At the same time, we have an ally, the United States, which is rightly demanding more commitment and responsibility from Europe. Summed up in one sentence, this means for all of us, vacation from history is over. More than ever, talking to each other is better than talking about each other. Incidentally, this has always been the credo of the Bavarian state government. The new town hall format in this room is particularly suitable for this. I am pleased that the discussion on the panel will be even more opened up to all guests in this way. On behalf of the panel, I would like to welcome Matthew Whitaker, the United States Ambassador to NATO from Brussels. Hina Rabbani Khan, Chairperson of the Foreign Relations Committee of the National Assembly of Pakistan and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan from Islamabad. Arantxa González, Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of the Kingdom of Spain, member of the Advisory Board of the Munich Security Conference from Paris. And as moderator, Gordon Ripinski, Editor-in-Chief, Germany of Politico Europe. Thank you for guiding us through the event today. Bavaria has been hosting the Munich Security Conference for over 60 years. This year for the 62nd time, and with the deepest conviction. Since its inception, the MSC has stood for the goal of creating peace through dialogue, even if the topics and security aspects have changed over the years. The fact that, for example, the global AI competition would one day be the subject of the conference as a security issue was certainly not something the founding fathers of the time could have foreseen. What remains, however, is the idea for international dialogue. To this day, the Munich Security Conference is really a unique platform for security policy talks, even outside the official framework and often behind closed doors. The theme of this year's MSC, Under Destruction, aptly sums up the general weather situation. Here and now, however, I look into many faces who are not involved in dismantling, but in building security and peace. So the topic is above all an appeal to all of us. That is the purpose of the Munich Security Conference, de-escalation, finding ways to talk, offering dialogue, listening in order to find and strengthen common ground. We are already starting today. I'm really looking forward to the presentation of the Munich Security Report, the panel discussion, and the subsequent discussions over lunch. I wish us all an interesting start to the MSC 2026. I wish us a successful and good MSC week. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. Chairman Ischinger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herrmann, and a warm welcome on behalf of the Munich Security Conference team to all of you. This is already a long tradition, thanks to the Bavarian government, where we can offer to the Berlin international community, to the diplomatic community, to the government, those representing government institutions, a glimpse into what's going to happen this coming weekend in Munich. So thank you very much for making it possible once again. As has been said, and as is being made clear through the report, which we'll be presenting to all of you in just a couple of minutes, I cannot remember a time where we had more simultaneous wars, crises, conflicts of that dimension all at the same time. So this is a challenging moment, certainly for European security and beyond. We expect, because of that, an unprecedented, almost unprecedented number of high-level decision makers, participants in Munich this coming weekend. We expect around 70 heads of state and government. We expect more than 140 ministers, foreign ministers, defense ministers, etc. And more, and I think this is good, more than 40 heads of international organizations, as well as, of course, many parliamentarians, civil society, humanitarian institutions, the military, the business community, academia, and last not least, many media representatives. Most important among all of this is that once again, we will have in Munich a very substantial bipartisan US delegation. There are not many places around the world outside the US capital where you will encounter 10, 15, or even 20 members of the US Senate in one room. I think that is a unique selling point for the Munich Security Conference, which attracts so many international leaders, business leaders to come to Munich to engage with the members of the US Congress and certainly with the delegation from the administration. I'm very pleased that Chancellor Merz has agreed to open the conference himself on Friday at the beginning of the early afternoon. And we are going to welcome, and I'm not going to use all the time to read a long list, just to let you know that just from within the European Union alone, we expect approximately 15 heads of state and government, including, of course, President Macron, Prime Minister Starmer, Donald Tusk from Poland, etc., Mette Frederiksen from Denmark, and so on and so forth, including, of course, Ursula von der Leyen and Mark Rutte, representing the two major international institutions in Brussels, EU and NATO, with their delegations. Every year now, for the last 16 years, I've heard people say, this Munich Security Conference will surely be one of the most important ones in recent history. And sadly, I think this year, that's actually really true. The war, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, is 2 weeks from now going to enter its 5th year. The 5th year. We have a war going on in Europe. And I think many of us have not yet fully realized what this means, not only for the pain which the Ukrainian society has been feeling, but for the security of all of us, of the rest of Europe. We will be discussing not only these current challenging, bloody conflicts in Europe and beyond, but we will be discussing such issues as nuclear security, Arctic questions, space. We will discuss the future of high tech as it concerns all aspects of security, and there are many, hybrid warfare, geoeconomics, climate security, human rights issues, food security, and of course, question of international development, and much more. In other words, a totally full agenda. Once again, I want to thank the State Chancellery, the government of the Free State of Bavaria, with you leading it, Florian Herrmann. Please offer our vote of thanks also to Minister President Markus Söder, who will also speak at the beginning of the conference on Friday afternoon. Now, in the spirit of what we call the Munich Rule. The Munich Rule means we don't want speeches, we want discussion. We want interactive debate, because we have here, and certainly in Munich next weekend, a huge number of highly qualified specialists, current or former foreign ministers, national security advisors, generals, admirals, important parliamentarians, etc. So our preference is for discussion, and I'm very pleased that our discussion, the panel has already been announced and presented by Florian Herrmann, that the panel will be led by Gordon Ripinski of Politico. Before he starts his discussion, his panel discussion, I'd like to invite Tobias Bunde and Sophie Eisentraut to come up to the podium here to present briefly the Munich Security Report, the title of which is Under Destruction. Tobias and Sophie, please, where are you?
Good afternoon. Over the past few years, the Munich Security Report has focused primarily on challenges to the liberal international order. From the outside, from revisionist powers seeking to reshape a US-led system. For some time, that order has been under growing pressure. This year's report, as Wolfgang just noted, is titled Under Destruction. It reflects not only that the challenge has intensified, but that its very nature has changed.
Core assumptions on which this order rested for decades are now being actively questioned, while core elements of the order are being dismantled. And this time, the greatest challenge to the liberal international order is coming from within. Because the country that stood out in shaping, upholding, and defending the order after 1945 has come to the conclusion that it no longer serves its interest. In important areas, it is therefore not merely neglecting the order, it is actively rolling it back.
Dean Acheson, one of the architects of the post-war order, famously entitled his memoirs "Present at the Creation." What we are observing today can, unfortunately, be described just as accurately as present at the destruction. For a long time, many in Europe underestimated what they were hearing loud and clear. President Trump and many in his administration want something fundamentally different, and they believe they have a mandate to shape things up, not only at home, but also abroad.
As part of this shake-up, the report shows the Trump administration has largely abandoned all three core pillars of US grand strategy that emerged after World War II, what political scientists often refer to as the Kantian triangle of peace.
First, the belief that multilateral institutions and shared rules enhance rather than constrain American power.
Second, the conviction that an open world economy and economic interdependence serve US prosperity and security.
And third, the assumption that democracy, human rights, and close cooperation among liberal democracies are strategic assets rather than ideological luxuries.
Across all three dimensions, we now observe a clear departure, as we discuss in the report in more detail. We also show that this rupture is shaping public perceptions of the US. Across all countries surveyed for the Munich Security Conference, the share of those who see the US as a threat rather than an ally has considerably increased.
Allied nations are particularly concerned. In Canada, as you can see here, only 41% of respondents now consider the US an ally, down from 68% just 2 years ago. We see similar trends in other countries surveyed, including here in Germany. And importantly, this survey was fielded in November, so before the most recent crisis in transatlantic relations. The US national security strategy warns that Europe may soon become unrecognizable. The feeling, increasingly, is mutual. Many people here no longer recognize the United States they thought they knew. For many observers, this recalibration of US foreign policy, as the administration calls it, is puzzling. Why undermine your biggest asset, your global network of allies, in a new era of great power competition? Why weaken a system that has also delivered enormous benefits to the United States itself?
This brings us to a broader question. Where does this desire to dismantle existing domestic and international structures come from? Donald Trump may be the most powerful disruptive force in world politics today, but he's part of a broader global trend, namely the rise of political actors who do not promise reform or repair, but who are very explicit about wanting to tear down existing institutions. In the report, we refer to them as the demolition men. Their radical agendas resonate because they build on widespread societal frustrations. Across the G7, as you can see here, only very small proportions of respondents believe that current government policies will improve the life of future generations. In France, Germany, and the UK, absolute majorities even believe these policies will make things worse. And this is not only about declining living standards, it is also about a loss of trust in the credibility of reforms and meaningful political course corrections.
For years, we have tracked a growing sense of helplessness across many Western societies. This sense has reached new record highs this year. In the European countries surveyed for the report, on average, more than 2/3 of people feel helpless in the face of global events. This is the breeding ground for political actors who promise to break the gridlock, to act decisively, to take back control, even if that means tearing things down.
Some observers, in fact, emphasize the potential benefits of a policy of disruption, and they draw parallels to Schumpeter's idea of creative destruction. They argue that innovation and renewal cannot be incremental, but sometimes requires disruptive acts. And indeed, on some occasions, US policy has managed to break institutional inertia and compel problem solving on challenges that were previously marked by gridlock. Without Donald Trump's shock therapy, for instance, would NATO really be on track to strongly increase defense spending? Or would we have negotiations over a political settlement in the Russia-Ukraine war?
But a key question is how sustainable these outcomes really are, and whether the short-term gains will outweigh the long-term costs of wrecking ball politics. Does NATO truly look stronger than a year ago? And how durable can a victor's peace, a Diktatfrieden in Ukraine actually be?
Even in the global south, where a second Trump term was initially greeted with optimism, there's now growing disillusionment. Destruction, many believe, may offer the opportunity to build something better, but for many in the world, what is emerging from the rubble looks like an order that simply privileges the powerful, not those who hoped that the destruction of the old would bring improvements to their lives. Transactional, often self-serving deals are increasingly replacing principled cooperation. Policymakers seem to be serving private rather than public interests, and great power dominance is taking the place of governance based on international rules and norms. It is therefore no surprising that in all countries surveyed for the Munich Security Conference, the downsides of wrecking ball politics dominate public perceptions.
For many countries around the world, and especially for this one, the end of benign US hegemony presents a fundamental challenge. Can key elements of the international order be preserved without or partly even against the leading power? As things stand, the new world will become much more fragmented, more volatile, and likely also more violent. It has already become more uncomfortable. But simply complaining, of course, will not change this reality. So the real question is how the rest of the world responds. We already see people and leaders who prefer reforms over wrecking balls beginning to make their voices heard. But those opposed to a full-scale policy of destruction must not only step up in words.
At least in many Western middle powers, as you can see here, however, people do not seem willing to take on greater global responsibility. While the publics in China and India support their countries contributing more, if other countries contribute less, in France and Germany, for example, people are much more reluctant. And those who prefer reform over demolition still have to demonstrate that meaningful course corrections are actually possible and far more likely to meet demands for social and economic progress than a policy of sweeping destruction. That will require them to set new priorities, develop sharper tools, and become bolder builders themselves. And perhaps most importantly, it requires cooperation. And of course, we hope to see ideas for how to revive this type of cooperation in Munich next weekend. And speaking of cooperation, teamwork has also been central, as always, to the Munich Security Report. And we would therefore like to very much thank the team and our partners who contributed to this report. And thank you to all of you. And we would now like to hand over to Gordon Rapinski.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sophie Eisentraut and Tobias Bunde for the report. Gives a lot of material to discuss and to debate, not only here on stage, but for the upcoming days. Before I start, I also want to encourage what Ambassador Ischinger said, that we are playing with the Munich rules, so it means it's an interactive format. You're all going to have the chance to ask questions. If I manage to have a 360-degree look at what's happening here, I'm going to try my best, I promise. But I'm now going to invite my panel to the stage, my panelists, and start with Matthew Whitaker, U.S. Ambassador to NATO. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. I invite Hina Rabbani Kar, Chair of the Foreign Relations Committee at National Assembly of Pakistan. Welcome on stage. And Arantxa González Laya, Dean at the Paris School of International Affairs at Sciences Po. Welcome on stage. And last, but absolutely not least, Mr. Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger. Welcome on stage. I want to start with you, Ambassador Whitaker. Do you approve the idea of a world order that is under destruction?
I completely reject everything I just heard, and I hate to, put on a black hat and immediately be combative, but I know this is what Wolfgang expected out of me, so that's why he invited me. I don't see a world under destruction. What I see is, for 76 years, and a lot of this is obviously in the context of NATO and my experience at NATO, together with being part of the Make America Great Again movement, campaigning with the president and for the president, 3 different election cycles, and understanding what it means to make America great again. And first of all, there were at least 2 things in the 3 pillars of this philosophy of the elephant that is completely wrong. First of all, We are not trying to dismantle NATO. All I have done is, with the 5% Hague defense commitment, is make NATO stronger. All President Trump is trying to do is, instead of the United States taxpayers and the plumbers and hardworking people in my home state of Iowa and elsewhere, instead of them bearing the burden of the security of Europe, we have tried to balance that out, that we equalize, that the burden is shifted to our European allies to equalize, to do more, and to be capable and strong, because that strength is what guarantees the peace. So that's the first thing I reject, is we're trying to make NATO stronger, not to withdraw or reject NATO, but make it work like it was intended as an alliance of 32 strong and capable allies. The second thing on the trade piece, and I don't know how much time we have here today, but this is important, is post-World War II, the trade arrangement between Europe and the United States was unfair. And the whole philosophy, especially post-war in the 40s and 50s, was that Europe needed time to rebuild. Well, that turned into Europe taking advantage and running huge trade surpluses with the United States. And President Trump looked at that and said, fundamentally, this is unfair. You can't sell American cars in Europe. You can't sell American, farm products, and certain categories of things are not allowed into the market for whatever reason, either because of obvious tariffs or because of non-tariff related trade practices and the like. And he said that is not fair. We are going to tear that down, and we're going to rebuild something that's fair, that's equitable, that gives American companies, farmers, factory workers a fair shot at fair trade. And the same challenge with China as well. And so those are two pillars that we're not trying to destroy anything. We're trying to make it sustainable, to make it work not only for Europeans, because it's worked pretty good. The term freeloading is a real term when it comes to security and when it comes to trade. And so President Trump looked at that and he said, we're going to fix this once and for all and make it work for the United States as well as make it work for Europe. And we've seen that, quite frankly, we've come to a good resolution, but now we're expecting implementation. Because one of the things that I've noticed in my time here in Europe is there is a lot of discussion and not a lot of action. Now, to be fair, the Germans very much are about action. Your other allies and our other allies are not always about action. They're more about words. And so we want action. We want to make the fundamental changes, operationalize the Hague Defense Commitment, make fair trade work for everybody involved, but again, strengthen our alliance and our allies so that we're all strong, and that strength is what's going to bring the peace.
Now, Mr. Ambassador, I would argue that one of the greatest successes of the first Trump administration probably was that actually the European partners did step up on defense. But the reaction of the second Trump administration was not to say, well, that's great, we all achieved something together, but instead challenging the territorial integrity of another NATO state in Europe. Why that?
Two different questions. I really actually don't think that when so many of our allies couldn't get to the 2% they had agreed in 2014 in Wales, was stepping up. I think there was, again, a lot of political commitment, but not a lot of action. You did not, when President Trump was sworn in 2025, you did not see, look across European security architecture and see allies that were strong and capable like they need to be to defend and deter right now in Europe. So, that's why we had to go to 5%. It's why we have to actually get these capabilities in the hands of European warfighters to continue the United States presence and involvement in NATO and NATO countries. But I think we just did not see a follow through like we're seeing right now. The second thing is that the whole dispute, I guess when you're talking about territorial integrity and I'm guessing what you're referring to. Are you referring to Denmark, Greenland, that situation? Okay.
I do.
So,
and I'd be interested.
So that is all a question of ultimately whether or not Greenland was properly invested security-wise by Denmark. The question is whether NATO was doing enough and our European allies were doing enough to contribute to the security of Greenland. It also deals with an issue that we have a lot of experience with, and that's microstates. Not currently if Greenland's part of Denmark, but if an independent Greenland with 50,000 people, can it defend itself? Would it be subject to malign influence by China or Russia and others? And so trying to resolve all of these issues together with the critical minerals that are available for mining and who will get a chance for those mining rights. The Chinese have taken 2 runs at least at Greenland, one through the ports, trying to invest in the ports, and second through trying to invest in the airport. And so these are real issues. And we've seen where this has failed in the past. For example, the Solomon Islands, which the U.S. was a security provider there, probably didn't pay enough attention.
Mr.
And there's
Ambassador,
Chinese police officers running around
do you
Solomon
need
Islands.
to challenge the territorial integrity of a country in order to solve the very true issues that you just raised?
I learned in the first Trump administration, ultimately as acting attorney general, that if I try to respond to every single Truth Social or tweet by President Trump, that would be a full-time job for me. He clearly identified the security needs of Greenland, how important it is to North America, how important it is to the Golden Dome deployment, and sort of his tactics are uniquely his. If you've read his book, you understand sort of how he processes these types of situations, and it's certainly got some movement, and we're making a lot of great progress trilaterally on all these issues that I just mentioned.
Thank you. Arantxa González-Laya, did we Europeans just not get that the overall goal of the US is to make NATO stronger?
I think, first, I think that this is a continent that understands that security and defense needs investments. It's a continent that is making the investments in security and defense. But this continent also understands that money is not enough, that in order to be credible vis-à-vis your enemies, you've got to have a serious deterrence capacity. And this continent finds itself in a very interesting, let's say, moment when the deterrence capacity of the NATO alliance is put into question by the NATO alliance itself. So, on the financing side, in my view, we are on the right track. Actually, I don't agree with this idea that we were taking advantage of the US. I question that. I think what we had, and it was a choice that we made together a long time ago, was that Europe would not have its own autonomous security, that the US would be the ultimate guarantor of European security, and that the EU would buy, Europe, not just the EU, would buy most of its defense needs from the US. That was the compact that we've been living with for a long time. Now, does this compact need a review? Apparently, it needed a review. At least one side of this compact said, let's review it. I think we are clear that this needs a revision. But we have to be careful what we wish for. Because what is happening now in Europe is that Europe is taking more seriously its security, will invest more, but if the calculation changes, the calculation also changes in Europe. Europe would want to make more investments in its own defense industry and would want to be more autonomous from a defense industry point of view. And this is what we are seeing in this country with huge investments also in industrial capacity, which means that Europe will buy more from European sources for its military needs. So we change the calculation, But let's be clear about one thing. What we need is not just investments, we need posture. And if we question the posture, we weaken the security of this continent. And we've seen a little bit of that, which is why I would hope that the posture is clear. Because at the moment, when I read the national security strategy that the US has put on the table, I have questions about the posture. And that worries me as a European.
But do you believe, as a midterm goal maybe, in European sovereignty in terms of security, or will we always be dependent on US support?
No, I think we've understood that we've got to be a little bit more resilient.
A little bit more resilient or independent?
Oh, listen, I'm trying to be a bit diplomatic here, right? Push me a bit. Yeah, I think we have to be more autonomous in our ability to defend our continent. Because what we know is that, well, this issue of Greenland has left a very sour mark in Europe. And by the way, it's not over yet. It's left a sour mark. And I think it's important that among friends we explain this. We will want to have more say in our own security and defense. Now, how we call this, I think we don't want to deplug from the US. I don't think we can deplug from the US today, but I think we want to be more resilient on the security and defense front. And by the way, this is a bit what we're hearing from the other side too.
Would you, in the worst case, see Spanish soldiers defending NATO in the Baltic countries?
I think this is a false debate in Europe. European soldiers, including Spanish soldiers, including Danish soldiers, including German soldiers, including British soldiers, have been in Afghanistan. They've been in Iraq. They've been defending Iraqi citizens, Afghan citizens. How on earth would they not be ready to do this in Europe? It's a false debate. What we don't have, and I think it's important that we move forward, European soldiers, Spanish soldiers, German soldiers, French soldiers are at the moment in every corner of the European Union, especially on the Eastern Front, because the threat is today very acute from the Eastern Front. They are there under a NATO flag. The only thing we don't have at the moment in Europe is a European command. And that is maybe where we've got to be investing a little bit more.
Let's broaden the perspective a little bit and come to your perspective, Hina Rabbani-Carr. Pakistan is always, or long-term, be an ally also of the US and will probably also change its view on the reliability of the partner US, or what's the current status as you can describe it?
Okay, so, when Chairman asked me to come out of the beautiful spring kite-flying skies of Lahore to the fresh snow of Berlin, and he said, he'll give me an offer which I will not be able to refuse. And when I saw the discussion points, he was right. It's an offer I cannot refuse to talk about this, because I think, and I was just noticing, I happen to be the only non-European, non-American person, at least on the stage, right? So really, forgive me for saying this, but our perspectives are so different, because what is appalling and making you all, question why and how, that is something which is very normal and casual to many of us in the rest of the world. So it is now the exceptionalism that is bestowed upon in a unipolar world on a largely, distinguishingly hegemonic country which is able to set all the rules with the support of the European architects who played along, etc., and created those rules. But those rules were actually worked very well for the creators of those rules and did not perhaps work as well for the others. But the others were asked to sit pretty and just follow the arc of history that had been figured out and end of history was happening. And this civilizational question had been answered for all of your civilizations. So now sit pretty and just follow the lead. And guess what? We did follow the lead. And guess what? Now the lead is leading us to the chief architect being the chief disruptor of the order, because the situation in the world has changed. And how has it changed? Let me break the first myth on which the entire pillars of this architect of world order are made on. That is this question of universal values and the universal care that we give to human rights, to economic goods, etc., etc. Those things have never really been universal to many of us, on which, we never saw that universality being applied when the wars were fought in Afghanistan. And, Rancha, my very, very good friend, mentioned how European soldiers were defending Iraqis without the approval of the Security Council, and defending Afghans from the Taliban, to leave them with the Taliban after 20 years of a lot of bloodshed and chaos and a retake, so I'm just going to take a side, track for a minute, because as Foreign Minister of Pakistan, I remember appearing to the NATO, in Brussels, to all the NATO ambassadors of the world, and I was there to argue that the war that we were fighting in Afghanistan was leading to more destruction and was creating more extremism, and there were more bomb blasts in Pakistan than before, etc. And they all started telling me the pretty story of how much they'd done, because they were all looking at it from the perspective of how much they'd spent, how many people they'd lost, etc., and not what was achieved or not achieved in the ground. So this real, Carney's speech, Prime Minister Carney's speech, I think was a welcome. It was almost, he put everything in words. But really, we've been speaking those speeches for a very long time, and we've been saying, look, this hasn't worked for us. And we have been calling it out, but nobody cared to listen. Okay? So what has changed? What has changed is that the only people, it seems, because, you have to call a problem the way it is. The only set of people, countries, nation states, for which this current order seems to be working very well, seems to be the Europeans and Canada. Not the US. The US is saying, listen, we don't want to carry this burden anymore. It doesn't help us so much. And the rest of the world is saying, great, meaning we are very willing to look at creating our own sort of order, or being universal in application of that order to us. But I just want to perhaps bring it to the table that this has been long in the making, has been called out by the others, by which I mean non-Western Hemisphere nation states, leaders, etc. We have actually destroyed this order about 20 years back, perhaps started to when we decided to weaponize the tools of order. When we decided to sanction selectively on issues such as human rights, etc., start making the difference between how we treat our friends, how we treat our foes. And I think the final, the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was when we started extensively and excessively and callously weaponizing the human rights machinery to give a lot of, so this thing that we are talking about under destruction right now has been pretty much destructed for, or at least the values that it professed for everyone. And my last thing on this is going to be, if you want to really see, so I started saying this, I think about 10 years back, that the values that we say we will go to war for, such as democracy, such as human rights, such as women's rights, etc., are values which seem to be constrained within the borders of those countries. So in the geography of the countries of Europe, those values are very important for their own citizens. But when it comes to the other citizens, how we conduct wars, how we take those, we are very, very selective. And we have been selective for a very, very long time. So this is no big shock surprise to us as such.
If we take this analysis, what's your wish to the US or to the European part?
So I have these notes, and it says President Trump's necessary welcome correction is kind of, I found reading the security strategy paper this time refreshingly honest. At least the US was saying what it was doing. It wasn't wrapping it up in this fancy language of human rights, protection, democracy protection. It was saying, these are our challenges, this is what we're going to do. So in some ways, it takes the architects, and this myth that, these anarchists and these, non-sort of preservers of order type of people are going to come and now break our lovely order. That's not happening. I mean, many of those countries are actually the ones who are trying to preserve bits and pieces of multilateralism because it works for middle power countries and not so, happy or powerful countries. And if the US is saying that, look, we don't want to carry everyone's burden anymore, it doesn't work for us, our infrastructure is dying down, we are left over. Look, this was created in a world post-1945 where the world, the power structure of the world when it came to economic or military or any other strengths or population or demography was very, very different. Who is today preserving the common goods, such as climate change, such as seeing how will we deal with the next? It's not, I don't see that to be very much around. So I think anything which is an honest reflection of the reality is, to be honest, a welcome change. And many of us sitting in the other parts of the world are not holding our breath saying, when will they come to rescue us? We're saying, let some of the myths die down so that we can stare reality in the face and deal with it.
Certainly, if the answer on your last question is help is on the way, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, which brings me to the question of Iran, that is the big question maybe of the day or the week. How do you look at this potential conflict?
Look, I look at Iran very differently. Again, I think where we sit determines where we stand, or vice versa. A very sane person once said that, right? And to us, where we sit on sharing a border of a few thousand kilometers with Iran, Iran doesn't seem to be the type of threat that many other countries have shown themselves to be by going to war twice for the sake of the Afghans, in the sense that it's very, very different. And when I am unable to buy the fact that we are, and this is obviously going to be very difficult, I'm very, very aware of this. I'm very aware of the moral and, the debt that Germany and many European countries owe to a certain group of people, okay? And not to the nation state of Israel, but certainly to the Jews. I think we all collectively owe that debt, right? But in the way the state of Israel has mutilated and conducted the war in live television, nobody from the outside world is now waiting for Europeans to do the right thing on ensuring that Iran is fair to its citizens. So what we say is important. So when we say we stand for human rights and we will come and defend your democracy and for the sake of democracy, but what we do is even more important. And after what people have seen and what we've done, whether it's, Venezuela, whether it is especially what happened, and here there are no Hamas apologists, because I think typically what happens is every time you say a thing like this, everybody starts saying, oh, you're in this. None of that. But lives of people are far more important than anything else. And when you take that for, as callously as we did, I think that has a permanent impact on the conscience of people who see us as they do. And for what they see, we can't hold that against them.
Ambassador Ischinger, you mentioned the fact that we're going into the 5th year of the conflict in Ukraine, of the war in Ukraine. Isn't one of the most significant findings for this year that Ukraine is maybe not even among the absolute top priorities of the conference?
Well, I certainly hope that this coming weekend will demonstrate that Ukraine deserves to be at the top of the agenda for a variety of reasons. Not the least important being that we've now been watching from not so far away the pain which has been inflicted on hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Ukrainians who've been living under ghastly conditions, without heat, etc., etc. In other words, let me be blunt about this. The Russian delegation, the Russian government, pretends to be willing to negotiate, while at the same time they continue to really, and I choose my words carefully, terrorize the civilian population of Ukraine. That, for us here in Europe, is surely the biggest challenge in a long time. I think it's something which, I would have hoped would never happen to us, and we don't have a very good answer yet. But if I may, in that connection, let me come back to your earlier discussion with Ambassador Whitaker. When I think about the mission which we as a conference platform, that's all we are. We are a dialogue provider. When I think of what that mission could be, should be for this coming weekend, I think of a double mission. I think that one part of the mission has got to be to consider ourselves like a bicycle repair shop, where somebody comes in with his bike and says, the chain is broken, could you please fix it so I can ride my bike this afternoon? Obviously, whether we like it or not, of course, Matthew Whitaker, you are absolutely right. 80,000 Americans are in Europe, the American nuclear weapons are here, and the NATO, considered as hardware, functions perfectly well, but we have had whether we like it or not, we have had a trust problem and a serious discussion because of Greenland, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, this repair work is about, essentially also about rebuilding trust and confidence across the Atlantic. The far bigger second mission that I can see for, at least for the European participants in Munich, is to go from lamenting, you know, about you guys, about what Donald Trump has said or not said, to real action, to decisions. Can we, I don't want to use too much time here, but just to throw out two questions. Can we move in Europe from a, the German word is Flickenteppich, from, you know, small time, 27 little defense markets? Can we move to a more consolidated, more capable, more competitive defense market that will be capable of sustaining the Ukrainian demand now that the United States has decided not to continue to be the #1 provider directly of military supplies to Ukraine? I think that can be done, but it requires political guidance, decisions, maybe some painful decisions, etc. The second question is, can we move in the European Union from, you know, this unanimity requirement, which is contained in our treaty, to a situation where we can take more credible, more meaningful decisions on foreign policy and security, meaning, is there a way for us to move in the direction of majority decision-making? These are almost, you know, in terms of the quality of the question, almost historic challenges. And I think the United States is giving us the best ever reason to take these questions seriously. So in other words, I appreciate in this particular respect, the destructive nature of what the United States has been putting to us in terms of questions. Can we do more? Yes, I think we can. Do we know how to do it? Not yet really. We're working on it. But this is why I think this coming weekend offers a very important opportunity with so many members of the US Congress in attendance, with a literally huge delegation from within the administration, with senior people from all the important departments, to chat with their European counterparts about the right way forward. I think we should try to move from public recriminations about things that have not been done well, and I think the Greenland thing, whether one likes it or not, really was a public relations disaster. It didn't help us. It certainly didn't help the respect that the United States deserves to enjoy in Europe, etc. Can we move in that direction of repairing the bicycle, and then hopefully for us to take decisions to make sure that we will be more resilient, that we will be more capable, that we will be less dependent on the United States going forward. That's what the United States wants, and I think we can do it, we should do it. And I hope a message like this can come out from Munich this weekend, because I think that's the message that should arrive in Moscow. That is the message that should arrive in Beijing, and that should be the message that arrives in other parts of the world.
Before I open up to the floor, so prepare your questions if you want, I would ask one more question to Ambassador Whitaker. Last year, J.D. Vance held his infamous speech at the Security Conference, and there are people who say it appeared as if the Vice President had two speeches in his pockets, and in the very last moment he chose the more disruptive one. First of all, would you agree to that? And second of all, what do you think will the message of Secretary of State Rubio will be?
Well, a couple things is, first of all, I think, certainly J.D. Vance, as vice president, gave a provocative speech that pointed out a lot of the things that were in our national security strategy almost a year later, pointing out sort of the view from 6,000 miles away as to how Europe has made itself less competitive, whether it's, the religion of climate change that was, in a dependence on Russian oil that was hard and made European commerce less competitive, or whether it was, the immigration that is, quickly being reversed as we speak. There's so many things were mentioned, and so I don't want anybody to think that I'm letting some of these points not go unaddressed. There's too many. But when the ambassador talks about a dependency, it made me think about a family. And when your kids are young, they're dependent on you, but eventually you expect them to get a job. And so to me, that's where we are. We still love them. You're still allies, but we want you to grow and become what you can become. And that doesn't mean we're severing the relationship. It doesn't, the autonomy, we're not asking for European autonomy. We're asking for European strength, that you are equally as strong as the United States, that you're still great allies, that our bonds are still close, that we just expect you to do more and to not be independent. I think that's the problem, is like, just because you're strong doesn't mean you're independent. In fact, the inner connectedness is more important. And I can't agree more on this European defense industrial base. It's crucial. The United States is, with a $1.5 trillion War Department budget, will use everything we can produce in the United States. And I would argue it's the best in the world. The most capable military equipment is coming from the United States. Just ask the Ukrainians. But what I would say is Europe is going to have to get to reconcile their industry, to quit producing so many versions of a armored personnel carrier, for example, to really reconcile the defense industrial base and to really produce. And this is the argument that we have all the time at NATO, is when it comes around, in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, instead of ramping up the industrial base, Europe just gave everything they could afford to give to Ukraine without really replacing it or producing more. And so that has put a lot of pressure right now on the American industrial base. And the only way we're going to solve this is for Europe to ramp up as well. And so many of these other things that, again, I'm not going to address every point that's been made by all the panelists, but J.D. Vance highlighted several things, and we can disagree. We can disagree with the politics of it, but fundamentally, the energy, the immigration, and the free speech issues in Europe are legitimate criticisms. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we're getting a divorce. Mom and dad are still together. We just expect everyone to be strong, and that strength is what, again, it's going to deter and it's going to guarantee the peace. And I keep coming back to that.
Thank you so much. We're going to collect some questions. I see Matthias Gebauer here. Maybe introduce yourself very briefly. I did it now, but generally, and direct the question to the panelists.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. Ambassador Whitaker, I have two quick questions for you. My name is Matthias Gebauer. I work for Der Spiegel from Germany.
I can't turn around and look at you.
That's fine. One question is concerning the NATO meeting, which is, besides the Munich Security Conference, one of the big diplomacy meetings this week. On Thursday, the NATO defense ministers meet, besides one minister, which is Pete Hegseth from the US. Could you elaborate a little bit? What sort of signal does the US send by skipping these meetings? It's not the first time. Secretary Rubio also skipped the autumn meeting. Like, what message do you want to send by not attending these meetings anymore?
Was there a second question, or is that it? That's it?
That was it, right?
Okay. I don't think there's any message to be delivered. Obviously, we have a big world and only one Secretary of War and only one Secretary of State, and they have a lot of places to be. And in this case, with Undersecretary Bridge Colby coming, he is the perfect person to talk about the defense strategy in depth, and how the U.S. lays down on Europe right now and going forward to talk about capabilities that may need to be ultimately transitioned out of Europe and replaced by European capabilities. And so I think it, you know, and our European allies have wanted to hear from him. Many have met with him. So this is a perfect forum for Undersecretary Colby to come and deliver, you know, that message. But I don't think there's any overarching message. You know, we have, within NATO, we have talked about what's the right number of ministers' meetings, you know, and how do we make sure that we have the right representation. I don't think, you know, the interesting thing, and I'd say this to him if I was looking at him, but I'm going to say it to our moderator as a replacement for the questioner. The interesting thing to me is in the last foreign ministerial, we had our Deputy Secretary Chris Landau there. There was another country that had a deputy secretary there, actually a number 3 or number 4, like a state secretary, and that was France. And nobody even commented about them not sending their foreign minister. And so, you know, the bottom line is we expect Europe to equalize, as we expect them to be stronger and to share the burden of European security with the United States and ultimately take over the conventional defense of the European continent together with the United States' overarching nuclear umbrella. You know, we're gonna continue to be engaged in NATO, but at the same time, there's you know, we're going to need to address our massive requirements in the Indo-Pacific, and you know, all that to be said, that you know, our ministers will continue to come, but they're just not, Pete's just not able to make this meeting.
I'll look at this block. Maybe take one question out of this block if there's one, please.
Yeah, hello everybody, my name is Christian Grimm. I'm a reporter for the Augsburger Allgemeine paper from Augsburg. Ambassador Whittaker, one question. We could read today that there is a new approach making a peace till summer from the US side. Can you talk a bit about this, how far this is elaborated and what we can expect from Munich?
Well, first of all, I mean, Wolfgang, this is going to be an exciting Munich Security Conference based on the interest in the topics that can be covered. I think secondly, you know, that June deadline was mentioned by President Zelensky. You know, I don't think that is anything that the United States has put out there. We want the fighting to end. We want both sides to come together and agree to a peace deal. We'd like it sooner rather than later. And you know, we want to see the suffering and the killing end in Ukraine, and it's that simple. I don't think, you know, deadlines are very dangerous in this setting because I think we want a peace deal done. I know that both my friends Steve and Jared are working very hard on getting a deal done, and they're having continued productive meetings. And you know, I think we'll just get this done as soon as it's ready to get done, but ultimately both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, are going to have to agree to any deal that's hammered out.
Do you believe it?
Can I just add one unfulfilled wish of mine? If you could use your influence on Steve and Jared, invite them to join you in Munich. We'd love to have both of them there.
I will text them.
I'm going to take one question here. Christoph Marshall.
Christoph Marshall from Tagesspiegel. Of course, Ukraine is on everybody's mind, but I would like to ask a question about the other war that occupied our minds over the last years. That's Gaza, since we have a high representative from Pakistan and from the US. Part of the Gaza peace plan is that somebody has to disarm Hamas and make sure that Hamas plays no role in the future. Who is going to do that? I heard not the Israelis, not the Americans, not the Europeans, but Pakistan is a Muslim country, has a hard-fighting army, and there were the idea that they should do that. Where are we? And because if there is no disarmament of Gaza, it's just a question of Hamas. It's just a question of time that we have the 6th Gaza war within a few years. Please.
Okay, that's a very, very, very difficult question to answer, because I think in order to answer a question, you need to be equipped to make the rules or to determine what will happen in that. So we've seen from the Board of Peace, where Pakistan is obviously a member, together with 8 other Muslim countries, and I think those 8 other Muslim countries and not European countries are part of Board of Peace, because the question matters to them, and because after seeing what we've seen, we know that in the words of a former Palestinian prime minister, this is the only path forward, not the best, but after this type of destruction, I think. So I think Pakistan and many other countries which are part of the Board of Peace and which have said yes to this, have made it very, very clear that a fundamental question that would need clear answer would be the question of Palestinian statehood. As we do remember, because I think it's so important to remember lessons from history, okay? And I'm going to, before I finish this, point out this one elephant in the room, which I see. But it is very important because do you remember the last time there was the Arab Spring and then there was this normalization, Trump won, okay? And people like myself and countries like mine kept on asking the question, what about the Palestinians in all of this? How can you build this new beautiful highways and motorways and structures, etc., and not deal with the root cause of the entire problem? And it was hoodwinked, shrugged under the carpet, etc. And look what happened after that. So that's a question that needs to be answered. It hasn't fully been answered yet as to what is going to the ways and means. And I think if you were specifically talking about boots on the ground, that will require a lot of clarity in a lot of stuff which is very, very fuzzy right now for any country, not only mine, but for any country to even come close to committing to something like that. I want to be unambiguously clear about that. And can I take this opportunity to just, when all of you lovely people have this conversation, one thing that comes to my mind is that the elephant in the room is that we are still using, in some ways, the tools of the past to deal with the challenges of the future. Because in many ways, there's this assessment or this, that it is the answer needs to be found between the Europeans and the Americans. Ambassador Whitaker can answer all the questions, and then we'll find the answers. The realities, and this order has changed or is not working right now because the realities on the ground of the world have changed, such as who's contributing most to the economic GDP of the world, who's making the most solar panels in the world, who is now coming in on the technological new frontiers type of areas, and perhaps challenging, the norms. So in some ways, a very bad strategy is not to read the room right, not to accept the reality on the ground, and keep on thinking that those who were the architects of the past will be the architects of the future. Those same people will not be the architects of the future because the present has changed. It is screaming out to all of us. We need to just accept it and perhaps widen the frame. And I give full credit to the Munich Security Conference, which has absolutely, from a very, very purely white male conference, become a very, very diverse conference. Okay, and to even ask people like me to be here in the kickoff, I think demonstrates that. I want to fully recognize that. But please, when you look for the answers, be aware of the fact that there's a lot of action and a lot of demography and a lot of, answers to the questions of today or the challenges of today, which are being found elsewhere, which we already know through the, articles written in The Economist, etc. It's common knowledge now. Let's accept that reality.
I'm gonna look. This is the challenging one for me now. This block. One question here. No questions here. More questions on that side. Oh, yes, please. One second.
Maybe just one quite technical question for Ambassador Ischinger. On which panel is State Secretary Rubio going to speak?
Our tradition in Munich has been for many years that the head of the US government delegation usually speaks not as part of a panel, but he gets his own opportunity to speak. And that's how we handled Vice President Vance last year, and I expect that's the way we're going to deal with Secretary Rubio. So you might want to expect him to speak probably at some point early Saturday morning. And I will probably be the one welcoming him to the podium, just like Gordon welcomed us here. And hopefully we'll have a good discussion.
Please. We have a microphone here.
Thank you so much. I'm the Colombian ambassador here in Germany, and I'm very curious about the thoughts on the region, Latin America and the Caribbean in this Munich Security Conference. You mentioned Venezuela. I'm from Colombia, it's very close, and my president is coming to have a voice as well on the new rules in this order, and how are we going to cooperate. Maybe it's a region that was not mentioned until now, but I'm sure that it's going to be important in this new order. Thank you.
I saw some sort of reaction on your side. Do you wanna answer this, Arantxa?
No, I think a couple of things. First, just like Hina, I think the world is very diverse. And we have to be careful not to reduce it too much, because if we reduce it too much, we're going to set ourselves for failure. And in this very diverse world, part of what Wolfgang and his team will try to do, and I think is very good, is to think what it's easy to distract. Distraction is the easiest of jobs. And now we've got distraction by design, which is even easier. But the question is, how do you rebuild? Because there are some people who are not ready to let this just be a simple game of distraction. There is many people out there that are not ready to accept a world that is in turmoil. So how do we rebuild? Are we going to do this like we did in the 1990s, with a refoundation of the system? Are we going to do this like we did this in the 70s? I think it looks a bit like the 70s. We bent the system, but we didn't break it. I don't think we've broken the system, by the way, because there is not enough people ready to break it. Or are we going to see, like we saw at the end of the 30s, a major clash, and then a total burn, and then a rebirth? We don't know. All I'm saying is, I see many countries around the world not ready to accept distraction. They want solutions. And I see many working towards those solutions. I think in the European Union, we've understood that there is plenty of appetite out there for finding solutions. Hence the agreement with Mercosur, hence the agreement with India, hence working to end child mortality, hence strengthening the relations with the CELAC community. So, I think it's very important to put this also on the table in Munich, the appetite of those who don't think the system today is perfect, but don't want to live in a world without system. I think there is a lot of space there.
Absolutely. Can I ask one question?
Yeah,
additionally, when we look at Venezuela, we saw that success, particularly success from the U.S. standpoint. Does this make President Trump a more interventionist president than we always have thought when we followed his first term, particularly when he made this point of ending wars instead of engaging in international crisis?
So one of the things that I've known through my entire time in government is don't look at what people say, look at what they do, look at the action. And so, the United States has not only said that we have a increased interest from administrations past of the Western Hemisphere, but we have done things in the Western Hemisphere, one, in Venezuela, but two, also to exclude, like we did in Panama, the Chinese having both ports on both ends of the canal. We have done things that demonstrate our enhanced interest and focus on the Western Hemisphere as our #1 security priority. We have a Secretary of State who is a Western Hemisphere guy, a son of Cuban immigrants, and we have a Deputy Secretary of the State Department who is our former ambassador to Mexico, somebody that is fluent in Spanish and understands the Western Hemisphere very well. And so I think the United States has an increased interest in the Western Hemisphere, and we're demonstrating that by our actions. Now, intervention is sort of, I think, an imprecise way to look at this, because there's a lot of ways, short of kinetic options, that you can influence your region, through soft power and the like. And so I think you're seeing President Trump, the thing that I know about him is that he likes to have options. He likes to find escalation rungs on a ladder that most people wouldn't think of or try. And so he is, in each case, looking for ways to, again, exclude China and Russia from the Western Hemisphere. The Greenland debate is another example of trying to exclude them from our unique Western Hemisphere zone of influence. And that's my term, not his term. So I think we're going to see that continue to evolve, and he's going to look for opportunities to make sure that everyone aligns with the United States. And that's, I think it's interesting. I think you make a really good point, and I think it is a diverse world, and there's certainly a lot of, not only a lot of just obvious diversity, but also diversity of thought and diversity of opinion on direction. But the United States, while our history has been imperfect, is always the best ally. We showed up twice to save Europe. We have, done our best in various ways to try to bring peace and security across the globe in regions that are both strategic and not strategic to us. We've tried to be the moral compass for a world of imperfect human beings. And who offers a different vision? It is the new axis of the deplorables, let's call it, to coin a phrase from campaigns past. It is, we see Russia and China with their no limits partnership, that the only way Russia can sustain its war in Ukraine is to buy dual use technologies from China. We see North Korean soldiers on the battlefield in Ukraine or supporting the battlefield in Ukraine and supplying a lot of weapons to Russia to sustain that fight. And we see an Iran that is certainly aligned with Russia. And one of the biggest technologies we see deployed almost every night in Ukraine is an Iranian technology, the Shahed drone. And so, so do you want to align with that? Or do you want to align with, the shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan set as their aspirational goal for the United States of America? I think the option is clear. Now we can, I think a lot of our allies can criticize the United States of America, but we are still your best friend and ally when it comes to making sure that we are moving in the right direction as a people and as a world. And I will, that's an area that I feel very strongly about, and it's probably one of the things that motivates me every morning to get up and fight for what we're doing right now.
Can I, Gordon, be a bit cheeky and not
Always.
question Matthew, but question you?
Of course.
It's a little point on Venezuela. We haven't solved the problem of Venezuela. We've replaced Maduro for Maduro regime, which is still there. So when we solve the problem, I'll be, and I'm saying this looking at the Colombian ambassador, who is the neighbor, knows very well that at the end of the day, this issue has to be resolved, preferably by the Venezuelan citizens, preferably in free and fair elections, but let's not cheer for something that hasn't happened, at least not yet. Sorry, I thought I would be cheeky vis-a-vis you.
No, that's fair, and I described it as a success, certainly from the point of view of the United States. But for sure, this is going to be.
Those are important steps. I think we all share that the Venezuelan people should be in charge of the future of Venezuela. And what we can't have is what happened in Libya. Under Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton is chaos, anarchy, and a leaderless, government-free state with powers, not adding to the stability of the world. And so I think what we were able to do in this Maduro situation is bring him to justice in the United States, at the same time maintain stability, but also have a narrow path forward to the Venezuelan people controlling the future of Venezuela. And the last election, I think we can all agree, was not fair and free, and we should expect this next one will be much better.
We would have time for one more question before we have a lunch discussion. Please, sir. Gentleman in the blue suit.
Thank you very much. I'm Neil Chauhan from Fortegis Technologies. And if you look at the agenda for the MSC this year, also it seems like sovereignty and resilience are big, big themes. And Ambassador Whitaker talked about Iran in the context of technology. But what can your governments do to support the development of technology and innovation to ensure sovereignty and resilience? Thank you.
Who do you want to direct it to? Who wants to take the question? Okay.
This is a favorite topic of mine, so I'm happy to talk about it. Several weeks ago, I was in Texas and California doing a defense tech and technology tour where I saw tremendous things, especially as the deployment of AI and autonomous systems together with, hard power. And I'm hoping, I went to SpaceX and saw what they're doing, and it's really incredible what some of the American industry is doing. And we need the same innovation and advancement as well in Europe. This is the only way that we're going to maintain a strong alliance, because the United States, as I keep telling, I think I've mentioned already today, can't do this alone. We need strong allies as well. Resilience is an interesting question, and we have a lot of our friends in the Nordic countries, in Finland and Norway especially, but Sweden as well, that are very good on the whole of society approach. The Finns, I think, lead the way on this in their approach to a whole of society security and making sure that they are a porcupine. And so, and we need to, again, inculcate that in the entire alliance, make our societies more resilient, and then we just need to invest. Part of the Hague Defense Commitment was about resiliency, dual purpose infrastructure, and investing in hardening our systems. And whether that's cybersecurity, whether that is making sure that our infrastructure is resilient to attacks. We're seeing it all the time with hybrid attacks, oftentimes initiated by Russia, where we are going to continue to have to be stronger and more resilient and invest in that. And I would encourage, I think, we haven't mentioned the EU yet, which is my, favorite thing to complain about when in response to Europeans complaining about the United States. But we need the EU to simplify. We would call deregulation, you call it simplification, whatever you want to call it. You're going to have to encourage capital formation, risk-taking, the types of things that are just in the American bloodstream. We're going to have to see that happen, not only in the defense technology, which is what I know the best, but just in technology generally. I just, there are way too many people. And when I went on this, I come back where I started. When I went on my tour in Texas and California, I ran into a lot of Europeans that were born in Europe but immigrated to the United States to do technology in the United States at scale. And I think Europe needs to harness that talent or they're going to be left behind.
I just wanted to add to that is all, of course, true, as Ambassador says. But just to say, just as a reminder, that 75% of the patents in the world are now Chinese in nature. Just as a reminder, China is currently exporting 12 million electric vehicles all over the world, where it had asked itself to do 3 million, just as a reminder. All of Europe and US together is not producing as much solar energy as one company in China's capacity to produce solar panels. Just a reminder that the future, if AI is going to be the determinant of artificial general intelligence, everything related to that, will require a whole host of very cheap energy to run whatever is the Internet of Things, right? So just a reminder that the technologies of the future require consistent, repeated investments and policy direction. And when countries go in and out of certain policies from one admin to the other, that normally doesn't do it in the long term. So just as a reminder that these are the technologies of the future, they will have an impact on the world, and whether we choose it or not, it will have an impact all over the world, and whoever is leading on that front will have an impact on perhaps the rule setting that we worry about.
Thanks. Yes, of
Can I just add a footnote to this, just to make sure that our public here has heard about this? We, the Munich Security Conference team, we take tech, AI, what you've just mentioned, very seriously. We are going to present this coming weekend in Munich a new advisory council with some really bright, some rather famous personalities who know all that I don't know about high tech, about AI, the future of AI, its implications to military affairs, etc., etc. One of the members of this group is going to be an American. Everybody has heard his name, Eric Schmidt, former Google head, and people of that kind of caliber. We want to make sure that going forward, the Munich Security Conference will be in front of the curve and not behind the curve when it comes to these rapid developments of high tech that we all need to take account of going forward in our, not only in our defense policies, energy policies and the like. Thank you.
Ambassador, I just take your point by saying I was thinking about how to conclude this panel, and I was thinking I'm going to conclude it with the things that we all agree upon here. And this is certainly that we don't only have 1 or 2 or 3 issues to debate and to solve potentially, but a lot more than those. Secondly, I think there's a lot more than 1 or 2 perspectives on the things, and this, I think, is also a takeaway from Munich. And third thing that we all agree upon is we need a little bit less bureaucracy in Europe. This is also an easy one. I also would like to add that I think this is, to me, it feels like it's not a weekend of Munich Security Conference, it's more a week of the Munich Security Conference that has started now. And my final remark is that we are now going to have the chance to have a lunch in the basement or a ground floor. And I thank you for participating, asking a lot of questions, listening, and we look forward to seeing you again in Munich. Thank you so much.